This meeting of the Westford School Committee for December 18th, 2023. We are being recorded, and if you're able to join us, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We're going to start with the consent agenda. There were a couple warrants in the packet, some budget updates, as well as a memo from Jenny on transfer of some inactive account balances. So if you weren't able to read the memo in fully, it's a couple balances that haven't been touched in various line item accounts, and they're going to be transferred and used in sort of like what's the other word there? In kind. There we go. Thank you. I answered myself. Motion to approve consent agenda as outlined in the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to move on to public comment. We take public comment in person and on Zoom. It is for any topic, any item or topic on or off the agenda. Speakers will be asked to stick to 2 minutes per person. Please use public comment even if you refer to something later on the agenda. Raise your hand on Zoom if you're interested, and you'll be promoted to panelist at your turn. And if you're in person in Millennium, please come to the microphone, introduce yourself, give your address, and then you can share your thoughts.
Good evening. Tom LaFlamme, 18 Poly Road, member of the Finance Committee, speaking as a private resident today. Let me start by being clear that I am concerned about the proposed cuts to the arts programs, but there are plenty of other people that I believe are going to be speaking to that tonight. So tonight I will speak to some bigger picture concerns that I have regarding the budget. I should also say that I've asked these questions via email to Dr. Chu, and he was very responsive to that, so I thank you very much. But I wanted to make sure to get these topics out for the public as well. The first thing is on the matter of the number of FTE, or full-time equivalent employee reductions. I asked for clarification about how the proposed reductions would be distributed, whether it be a whole person or spread amongst a department. And I use the example of the 0.8 reduction in world languages. And my understanding is that it would likely be basically a 0.2 reduction across multiple teachers. So based on my math, that's 4 employees, or about a quarter of that particular department would receive a reduction of 20%. My concern is that I don't know many people that can absorb a 20% cut in their pay and remain effective and committed to their employment. I believe that this would lead to a significant turnover in the staff and effectively undo the efforts to provide competitive pay for our educators. While it may not be fair or even practical to impact only one employee in this example, I am left to wonder if it would be more beneficial to the long-term quality of the education to do so. My other concern is related to the number of direct service positions as opposed to indirect positions being reduced. As one example, I asked how many curriculum coordinators were also classroom teachers, and the response were that some were and some were not. I don't remember the exact numbers. And please don't take this to mean that I don't appreciate and understand the need for that particular position. It's just an example. It's just that I believe that the ultimate quality of our education is based on the relationships and teachers in the classrooms, and I would hope that reductions outside of direct student impact would be considered as well. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks, Tom. Anybody want to go next?
Hello, my name is Ethan Mandel, 4 Buckingham Drive. I'm a private citizen. I'm a student at Westford Academy, the Vice President of WA Bands, a member of the Westford Academy Theatre Arts Executive Board, but most importantly, a member of the Westford Academy Performing Arts Council. We are a group of student leaders who are interested in protecting our Performing Arts Department at Westford Academy. My colleagues and I are here tonight to strongly urge the school committee to reconsider the proposed budget cuts to the performing arts in the need-met budget allocation for fiscal year 25. I'm here to say how my life has been personally affected by the Performing Arts Department at WA, and how cutting resources for our department would only do our district a disservice. We currently operate as one of the most prestigious and well-respected performing arts departments in the state. We serve hundreds of students, and I can personally say that the effect our currently well-funded and fully fleshed-out program provides has a major impact on every single child involved. If the department I now call home did not exist when I came to WA, I'd planned to be majoring in engineering. And I think I would have hated every second of it. Now, because of the incredible education I've learned, the skills I've gained, and the incredible community I work with, I've now realized I want to go into theater professionally. I want to be doing AV, event production. Without the program, I wouldn't know this. Truly has changed my life indelibly. But that's just my story. And there are hundreds of other students in this department who have been incredibly well served. We have there are hundreds of alumni who are in professional theater gigs. There are hundreds of alumni who now work in music, all of which are because of our incredibly well-benefited program. So now I urge you, please reconsider the budget cuts, because I cannot guarantee we would have the same effect if the salaries would be cut. Thank you for your time, and I hope you would consider me and the students I represent our opinion. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Jeffrey LaFlame, 18 Poly Road. I am the Westford Academy Band Board President, Trium Chapter 4351 President, Westford Academy Choir Member, Stony Brook Theater Arts alumnus, and a member of the Westford Academy Performing Arts Council. I've been involved in the Westford music programs for 8 years since I started here in 5th grade, and because of the support from the amazing Westford Academy arts teachers, I am looking to pursue a future in music. The Performing Arts Department is integral to the development of students as they find their place in their communities. Not only is it an amazing emotional outlet and a great way to get involved in the community, but it has also been proven time and time again that taking performing arts classes will give a student a higher chance of getting into college. But the values of the performing arts goes beyond just getting into college and having a good time in high school. Participating in a performing ensemble has great impacts on the student's character as well. I would like to read the mission statement of one of the schools in the Westford Public School System, Stony Brook Middle School. We believe in preparing our students for active, positive participation as both local and global citizens by developing and fostering creativity, communication, collaboration, and critical thinking. The performing arts system, the performing arts program at our school system does just this. By making the proposed cuts to the salaries of the performing arts teachers, we are restricting the students' ability to be creative, communicate, collaborate, and think critically. Thank you for your time, and I hope you take this into your consideration.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Isabella Hesse, 38 Chamberlain Road. I'm a junior at Westford Academy. I'm also the president of the Orchestra Executive Board, the treasurer of Trium Chapter 4351, a member of the Westford Teen Arts Council, and a member of the WA Performing Arts Council. Since I moved to Westford right before high school, I've been taking orchestra at WA for my entire high school career, so that's about 3 years now, and I can honestly say it's been one of the most enriching experiences of my life. I've also taken part in setting up and hosting various musical events, both at Westford Academy and within Westford as a whole. And my biggest takeaway from these experiences is the joy that performing arts brings people, including myself. Performing with the orchestra is probably 2 of my favorite times of the entire year. And I've also taken away how important performing arts is to human culture and mental health. Numerous studies, including one done in Ohio in 2005 on the effects of performing arts in public schools, showed how performing arts not only improve students' mental health, but also increase their test scores in core subjects, including math and English. The Performing Arts Department is a vital part of the culture and student body at Westford Academy, and cutting the budget for VPA would have harmful effects on a large portion of students and the overall atmosphere of WA. According to the Westford Academy Enrollment Report, In 2022, almost 20% of students were enrolled in music and almost 20% of students were enrolled in theater, which is a substantial portion of our student body, which makes the department all the more important. I ask you to reconsider the proposed budget cuts and reflect on just how big of an impact the VPA department at WA has had on so much of our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Hello, my name is Jacob Bluestein, 1 Pearson Way, speaking as a private citizen. I am a senior at Westford Academy. I am equipment manager for the vocal music department and a member of the Performing Arts Council. Throughout my time in Westford, performing arts has been a pretty major part of my and my friends' experiences. Even for students who aren't planning on pursuing music or performing arts as a career, such as myself, these programs are important for the way they're able to bring students together and bring people out of their shells. I'm here to ask with my colleagues that you reconsider the proposed cuts to the Performing Arts Department. I'm sure you have heard and will hear plenty more in the future from my colleagues about the merits of our program, so I won't speak any more on that. The proposed cuts would more or less destroy the Performing Arts Department. Running off 1 teacher per discipline, what we're already doing, is asking a lot of our hardworking staff already. Putting them into part-time, cutting off benefits, all of that would only serve to damage the department, possibly beyond any hope of repair in the near future. It would also probably cause fairly high turnover. I don't think any teacher could stand that kind of cut to their income. With all of the new students that we'll have coming in from the large population in middle school music classes and theater departments, it will be nearly impossible for the department to adequately accommodate all of those students if these cuts are passed. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Steve Engdahl, 53 Russell's Way. I am a resident, a parent, and I represent the organization youthartswestford.org also. Today, 2 minutes, 15 seconds if I speak fast. Instrumental music and performing music, your recommended budget, not the other one, the recommended budget, cuts 0.6 of an FTE in visual and performing arts at Westford Academy. If you move 1 teacher, or we've heard possibly a few, to part-time, it does create outsized damage to multiple programs. These are the only teachers that run these programs at WA, 1 FTE each. You did exactly that in the elementary schools some years ago. You lost, in the process, a long-tenured, experienced teacher, and you've struggled with high turnover since. You know what that does to quality and continuity of education. It's not a haircut reduction, it's a phase shift. And it's a stretch to believe that trying the same thing at WA would yield any different results. So let's forget the social, emotional, and cognitive benefits of music, and let's just talk dollars and cents. If you're looking for cost-efficient education, music is your friend. It's a bargain, especially band, chorus, and orchestra. You talk about class sizes in the last meeting, 22, 25, 27. A strong band, chorus, or orchestra program can run it well beyond that, up to 75 students or more. That's a 3-for-1 cost savings versus putting those students in other desks. And then there's special education cost savings. These students participate in mainstream band, chorus, and orchestra. It saves money versus customized instruction. It supports the state's goals that they talk about, 9 things they talk about in school improvement plans. This is one of them. And it also enables those students to form more connections with more of their peers, given the class size. This board, inclusive of your predecessors, I'm not pointing any specific fingers here, but the board does not have a strong track record with instrumental music in particular. You flipped elementary band to part-time, high turnover position. You reduced the types of instruments that were available to start with, and you implemented really high fees that deter families from trying instrumental music to begin. And then those students move to middle school. You've progressively reduced the amount of rehearsal time. In one of your middle schools, you don't have a band or an orchestra. There are sectionals, but the full ensemble time has been removed from the program, removed from the schedule. And now this cohort, after going through a pandemic, is arriving at WA, and it's no wonder many of them don't feel a strong connection to music. Some do, but we know how we got here when we look at the population overall. The recommended budget just seems like it could be another ratchet in the gear that's squeezing out the performing arts in Westford. And 0.6 FTE, it's small, it's tiny. And don't pursue short-sighted cost savings in lieu of longer potential financial efficiency going forward. I think you have an opportunity to inflect this. I think you should be doubling down on music rather than turning your back on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Nope.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. We don't respond during public comment, but if you stay for the budget agenda topics, you might hear some relevant details. So I'm going to move on to our next agenda topic, which is informational updates.
So the first thing I'm going to share is that in about 15 minutes, you'll all
Breaking
be
news.
receiving notification that we're going to have a 2-hour delay in Westford Public Schools tomorrow not because you're all here and it's late, and I would love to be that to be the reason. We still have some of our schools who don't have power, and so in order to try to give the utility crews more time before we have to make a decision as to whether those schools can go in or not, we're going to have a 2-hour delay. And in the message, I tell people that I'll make a decision and communicate that before 8 o'clock in the morning as to whether the schools are able to receive students. In that, it's still important to know that our out-of-district transportation will continue as scheduled. And because it's a delay, our preschool AM preschool program will not take place.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's 7:30. It's scheduled to go out, which means it'll be like, different alerts will be going off and things like
Please
that.
silence your cell phones.
Please silence your cell phones, right. So that's breaking news.
Okay.
Then just a couple of quick things. Both Courtney Moran and I were able to go to WA to experience the mini mental health fair last Monday that the health classes put on. It was fantastic. The students had worked in groups and they had done different projects on a number of different mental health issues, and they were sharing their presentations in the flag lobby for different groups to come and see, and for us to go in and watch and things like that. And I thought the teachers did an excellent job with that. The students did an excellent job. It was towards the end of that semester of the class as well too. I thought was great. Tomorrow morning, as we're talking budget and all things budget, tomorrow morning, Town Manager Kristen Lass and I are going to be meeting together to schedule our road show of conversations that we'll be having to meet with different organizations throughout town to answer questions and to just talk about where we are with the budget specifically. And
Sure. During the last meeting, during public comment, it was suggested to us that we put out some type of a survey to have a better understanding of why students might be leaving our district. We do have a form that had been handled by each school that was given to families as they intend to unenroll and to gather a little bit of data. Then that form kind of transitioned into a Google Doc, and so we have had that mechanism in place, but a couple missing pieces that had been suggested. So we have added a few more questions to that Google Doc, and we'll be collecting some more data as if students intend to unenroll for whatever reason from Westford Public Schools.
Thanks for responding to that.
Right.
Could we figure out a way then how we can report that or gather that data then and bring it to school committee as well? I know it's important for you guys to know, but to how we could share that in an efficient way as well at some point.
Sure.
Awesome.
And I think that
Yeah.
from what we've gathered just through the building level, nothing has stood out
Yeah,
or had been offered as a big, aha moment
okay.
with several of those
Can I ask that? So how
unenrollments.
long the form has been in existence, and like what's the ballpark? Like, do we have like 5 of these that have been returned? Do we have like 20 of these? Do we have like none of them that have been returned?
So the forms had been traditionally handled at the school level that they had gathered, and then I think it was probably during COVID that we were trying to do some more efficiency as far as sending records out and requesting records. So that's when it transitioned to our Google form, which was more for that reason. It was still gathering who was leaving and why, if they chose to share that with us. But with some of the comments that were offered, we'll, drill down a little bit more and look at that. So the form that we were using was more to help kind of facilitate the records going out in a timely manner.
we still haven't seen a lot of them. given to us.
Okay, so you haven't been getting a big return on them. All right, thanks. That's just what I wanted to know, like if there's going to be anything significant.
And soon, the calendar committee tomorrow will get together to start looking at the calendar for the 2024-25 school year. This group is being made up of elementary, middle school, high school representation, as well as WEA and school committee. And we will take a look at our first pass, and hopefully by January 16th, have a calendar that we will be bringing back to this committee for a vote on that calendar year.
Yeah. And I'll just add, because I was going to mention it in mine, so if any, because last week was our elementary conferences with the new schedule, so if there's any feedback from those,
Yeah.
please reach out. Was that it?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. School committee updates. We'll start over here. Reading each other's mind.
Yeah, we're had a meeting last week,
We had a
and
good
we're
meeting. Will be more to come
plans
soon.
for
More to
after
come from
policy.
policy.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Anything over here? No.
More to come in January, yeah. It's gonna be hot and run.
I had
Focusing on the budget these days.
I had a couple, since our last meeting, superintendent evaluation subcommittee met, and we are scheduling our next meeting to be at the end of January so that we can collaborate with Dr. Chu on a mid-year review. That would be in our business meeting. Finance subcommittee met last week and chatted about the FY25 budget with Jenny Lynn, Director of Finance, and Dr. Chu, and helped sort of develop what topics to talk about tonight and what we thought as a first pass should be more details shared about. If you're following the FY25 budget process, another update here that Select Board had a meeting last night that's on YouTube where the town manager presented the town budgets version of the A and the B budgets. So you feel free to seek out that information too. And we have a joint meeting planned for January 9th with the Select Board. That's all my updates. And we have no student representatives today, so. Okay. We will move on to our first order of business, which is an update on the MSBA.
Yes, so in the packet, you should see the letter that came to us on December 13th. Our statement of interest was approved by the Massachusetts School Building Authority to invite the district into Module 1, which is the eligibility period, to look at a potential project with the Robinson School. So that's very exciting. The letter in the packet details when there are 19 schools that have been invited into the eligibility period. There were 63 schools submitted statements of interest. They came and visited. They had a senior study team come and visit Robinson first day of school. So there was a lot of activity around when we did that. And then they go through this process of looking at the statement of interest and looking to see the impact that it would have on the district. And so the fact that we were invited into this eligibility phase is wonderful. Then they phase those 19 schools into this process. So some districts, their clock, if you will, there's 270 days for us to meet all of the requirements that we need to meet for the eligibility period. Everyone's clock starts ticking at a different time. So ours doesn't begin until August, which means at that time, some of it is an easy formality, like filling out a form that says that we agree to, abide by certain regulations. Then the next piece will be establishing a building committee. We have to fill out an educational questionnaire about the programming. One of the things that is a part of this process is the consideration of consolidating two of our schools. And so in our SOI, if you remember from the feasibility project that the study that we had done with SMMA, we identified Abbott and Robinson as being the highest needs. And so this proposal will consider consolidating those two schools into one school, and that'll be a part of this process. The important thing that we learned on Thursday, Valerie joined me and Director of Facilities Jeff Goodwin, Christine Collins from the town, and a couple of other people in a module orientation. There are 9 different modules through this process. And there are multiple votes that have to take place both here and at the MSBA. So being invited into this eligibility phase is literally just
Step one.
just step 1 of 9. And we then we still have a lot that we have to do in order to ever proceed. And if for everybody, I think we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but now that they've actually invited us in, for people to understand, at the earliest, this is a 5 to 7 year process.
If everything goes
If
smoothly.
if everything fell, all the stars aligned and everything fell in along their timeline, it would be at the earliest 5 years before anything happened. Right. And more likely 7, and it could even be a little bit longer than that.
Well, I noticed in the letter, the date that stuck out to me was July 1st, 2026, which is the earliest possible date that they would even vote on.
That's right.
On granting.
That's right. That's right. Which I will say, in the call, it was a public meeting with the MSBA, or when we were doing the orientation piece, there were some districts that were asking questions about that because they were so eager to want to move faster that they were like, believe us, it won't happen that fast.
Well, again, the language is like, do not pass go.
That's
We
right.
will
Yes.
slap your hand
Yeah.
if you try to go
That's
too
right.
fast.
Right. So we've received their information. They've assigned us a project manager, but we won't even start our process until August. I mean, they might send us some of the paperwork a few months early that we could get started on, but all of that happens in August. And so it's a very exciting thing. We're excited about the idea that we could potentially, look at having a project that's supported by the MSBA, but it's still a long road ahead.
And can you remind us, even starting the feasibility study still doesn't mean,
That's right.
like it could still be a renovation?
That's right. So what'll happen
Or
is
repairs.
we'll fill out all of the information in this eligibility piece. And then the MSBA will decide whether, if we have met all of their criteria and they approve of our education plan, then they could then invite us into the feasibility phase. Now, we just did a feasibility study with the district, and so some people would say, why do you have to do that again? But our feasibility study with SMMA was really super, super high level. And so what the MSBA, and we knew this going into this is not new information. We knew that if you go into an MSBA process, then they make sure that you do a complete, thorough feasibility study for the specific project with their experts and with their people, because they're potentially going to be reimbursing money, so they have a vested interest here. So they want to make sure that it's now being done under their supervision. And so we will do a very specific feasibility study on Robinson and looking at the Abbott School as well too. And then out of that, they will give recommendations as to what would happen if we did nothing, what would happen if we brought things just up to code, what would it look like if we did renovations, and what would a new project look like? So those are the 4 things that come out of it. And then the MSBA votes as to whether they think that you can continue with this. We as a town would then vote as to which one of those paths we would want to pursue. We want those 2 things to line up because they still have a lot of stake in the game, because they're going to potentially be reimbursing a lot of the project. So therefore, if they want us to do, their recommendation is very important, and if they want us to do one or the other, then it's in our best interest to follow their lead, because we could then lose potential funding if we decided to go on our own. That's a whole separate vote. And then you get into the actual design of the building, and then you get into construction. That's the 9 modules that go along. So it's a long time.
I'm going to open up to questions, but I just wanted to also
sort of anything we can do to speak to the elephant in the room, which is talking about a project like this
Right.
in tough budget times. Like what, I mean, how can we give some context to that, right? Like it's a 55-year-old building with
Yeah.
original HVAC, original, like there would still be costs that arise from just doing nothing.
Right.
So this is like it feels ill-timed, but it's still a responsible way to think about one of our buildings.
Right, and it's also, these are things that are now becoming very public in different ways, but they're things that we've been talking about for a while, right? So the whole purpose of our feasibility study in the first place was to do a space utilization, to look and see if we had capacity within our buildings, to look and see the needs so that we could develop our 10-year capital plan. We know that there needs to be work in every single one of our buildings. That's something that we're aware of. The degree to which that work needs to be done is different in all the buildings. And so the idea that this is now taking place at a time when we're also talking about a very significant budget concern is certainly not ideal. The two things are separate in that any type of building projects would be debt excluded, and it would be part of the different conversations that they've had at town meetings over the past couple of years about a number of different projects, versus we're talking about our general operating budget, which is very different. But yeah, it's also their time. Here we go. These are the messages beginning at 7:30.
Sorry.
There is a little music in the background. It's not all that entertaining though. But so the idea of we will be talking about it, and certainly people will have questions about it at town meeting, but based even on the MSBA's timeline, we can't begin the process until August, so we will be talking about any potential impact in future town meetings. But that's important for people to see that these things have all sort of been moving at the same time, and they're falling, they're coming to fruition at different times, I guess.
Okay. And the last point I want to make before I open it up is just that how this ties into the budget task force, which was,
Yeah.
we talked a lot about efficiencies and sort of the structure of our district, which is 9 buildings.
Right.
And the costs that are just part of that, right? And so the fact that there's consolidation as part of this potential conversation, that does tie into this holistic view of
True.
budget task force. So,
Yeah, thank you.
anyway. Questions from the committee, comments?
My understanding is, though, it's just being invited into the process is a big hurdle in itself to
It is.
overcome.
I mean, 19 of 63, right,
Yeah.
was the numbers we were told, yeah.
And I was only reading of some districts who've applied 2 and 3 years, so,
Right,
I mean.
and we were in our first.
On our
in
first,
try. You're right.
yeah.
There are many districts that have to just keep resubmitting.
Yeah.
Um,
But I think SMA were in the feasibility study they had done, they seemed to be very confident in the whole thing. So clearly it shows that
Yeah.
we had prepared well for this process.
There is one additional thing that we'll need to do because we didn't submit a statement of interest for the Abbott School. We were, the previous process with the MSBA was that you could only submit for one specific building. But now they're telling us that, well, no, you can have multiple buildings in there, you just have to prioritize one. And so what they have told me is that because we did identify the Abbott School in the information in our feasibility study, and in the SOI had mentioned that, they want me to submit a separate statement of interest for the Abbott School so that they have all of that data in their database. So that they'll have the same, that's right, it's the same information that we'll take from the feasibility
Awesome.
report. We'll put it into their system so that they'll know the age of the building, they'll know all of those different architectural things and the student population that is there currently, all of those things. But we will need to do that again, which means I'll have to do that whole report again, and I'll share it with you, and I'll have to sign off on it. You'll have to sign off on it. The town manager will have to sign off on it again. Same thing we did before. It won't need to go through their, it won't have to go through their approval process, though.
Right.
They just
Yeah.
want it in their
They'll
database.
just amend it.
Sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
Any questions, Bill, Sean,
comments?
We've got 7 years to ask a lot of questions by the sounds of it, so.
Pace ourselves.
Exactly.
Oh, I officially know more about those 9 modules than I
Right?
ever really
It was-
wanted to
It
know.
was an engaging PowerPoint presentation.
I'm going to move us on to the 7:35 agenda item, FY25 budget. So I guess I'll just start by pointing everybody to the meeting packet, which does have the 2 versions, thank you, Jenny, of the line item detail of both versions. Also the sort of the function code, which is like each category of the budget variance from last year, and then a brief narrative explaining that. That document exists for both budgets also. Jenny also created a memo that you can read through, basically the narrative of that, and then,
The slides, everything should be in there.
okay, and then there's an update to
We've updated the slides as well. too.
last meeting's slides. So why don't we start there, on those, the new slides? at
Well,
the
do we
end?
want to start there, or would you just want to talk quickly about the function code
Okay, more.
details? And then, because Jenny can kind of walk us through even the school choice and special education
Okay, yep.
projections, and if there's, again, to remind everybody, what Jenny has shared with you is what we've done the past couple of years.
Yep.
And so there are notes, this is what we're sharing also with the FinCom, when we go through the budget hearing.
Forward to the select board too.
Yeah. Have we forwarded this to the select board as well too? We sent it to town manager and to,
We sent it to the town's finance director, but
Okay.
we told them those documents won't be public until Monday.
right,
Okay.
so we can forward it now, we were
Okay.
waiting for all
Just
of
make
you
sure.
to.
Yep, thank you.
So if we look at that, I mean, that, again, that just breaks it down by function code, right? So, where there were, what we thought were significant changes, we try to articulate what those changes might be. And, Jenny needed to do this twice, right, which is, so there's a difference between the 2% and the 7%. It's something that we can continue to talk about. It might be something that you want to spend some more time with, and we can talk more on January 2nd. And we'll certainly be talking about it during the finance, the budget hearings as well, too, with the FinCom. So you might not have questions about it tonight, but if we could also then just talk about the school choice and special education
Yeah.
projections before we then get into the WA sections.
Okay, so, one of the questions I had prepared for, finance subcommittee was, since we are in one, I'm blanking, we're using school choice for this year's special education, remember the statewide
Right.
increase? We're using school choice for that. So I just wanted to check in on where those 2 funds, our special education stabilization fund and our school choice, how those will look after that usage, and then in the budget scenarios, there's an increase of the school choice offset. So I just wanted to really lay those out. So Jenny prepared that, it's in the packet.
Yep.
If anybody had questions on that. I know we looked at it, we got a preview of it for finance committee, so, finance subcommittee, sorry. Okay. Good, all right, so then we can move on to our discussion of the WA sections,
Yeah.
and even just the update of the
Yeah.
FTE numbers, right?
If we bring up, do we have the slides? Thank you, Jenny. I'll let you swap out with Principal Toomey.
Because
Yeah, so if you,
before WA.
right, so in what I shared, what's in the
Yeah.
packet tonight is an
Just opening this up so
updated slide presentation that has about 11 to 12 new slides. So we're gonna skip to where that starts. I do want to just note, just if there was a question back on slide 12. Remember there was that note in the side when we were looking at the middle school and high school section count? And there was a note on the side that said 3 OR students moving over, so then we weren't exactly sure what that was. That's actually, we have some open enrollment choices, so that's what, so within the town of Westford, people who live in Westford, they can apply for open enrollment if they want to go to a school that they're not districted to go to, if you will. And so that was what that was capturing, and instead of OE, it said OR. But once we looked that down, we're just capturing that, so. And I just removed that notation because it was creating more confusion than anything else. So slide 12 was updated for that reason. But if you go to 33. So in slide 33, it's where I had originally put the total FTE adjustments. And Jenny did an excellent job looking at this afterwards and realized that as I put this slide together without necessarily talking with her, so my apologies for that. The first two bullets, I did not include the additions so the 27.2 initial reductions was the reductions. Then we talked about the FTE additions of 4.4. This will make more sense in the next slide. So the numbers, the red numbers, 47.4 and 64.2, were actually inaccurate because I counted the 6 twice. So I had actually already rolled the additional of the 6 in to that third bullet. So it really should read that the additional FTE reductions to remain within Proposition 2.5 constraints is really 53.4, and our total is 70.2. So I just fixed that slide, and then we added a new slide. So on slide 34, Catherine, if you just go to slide 34, Jenny did a much better job creating a chart and a graph that explains the whole thing, right? So you have the override, the initial reductions, the additions that we talked about. Then we have if there's no override, the additional reductions we would need to do, plus then the addition of the 6 academic coaches. All of that totals 70.2 FTEs. The other thing that this does is there were people we had questions about how many drivers were there. So you'll see here, our in-district transportation, we have 18 drivers. And there was also a question as to the number of interventionists we were talking about, and that's 30. So we have that itemized here so that you see those numbers as to how they all add up. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the updated information from our last conversation. Now, so I've asked Principal Toomey to join us this evening to just help answer any questions that you might have as we talk about the different sections of WA, because there's always been different conversations around that. When we talk about the sections at the elementary schools, it was a little bit easier to sort of wrap your brain around, right? You just don't need as many grade 2 sections, for example, right? But when there are so many students take so many different classes at WA, it's harder to identify that. So if you go to slide 35, what you'll see is when I first met with the principals and specifically talked with Mr. Toomey about looking at the class sizes that exist at WA, he did a couple of different things to look at, and he can share that in a minute of what he did. But what I want to kind of share with people as we talk about these point positions, and this speaks to some of the comments that we heard tonight. We'll have a little bit more clarification about what we're talking about, and some of the things that I've been hearing lets me know that maybe things haven't necessarily been as well communicated, or there just might be some misunderstandings around. But for your purposes and for the general public, a point 2 is one section. It's one class, right? So if we talk about a reduction of 0.6 ELA in that department, what we're talking about is 3 English classes. So 3 actual sections of classes. We would have less of those because of the number of students now, right? So in social studies, we can absorb one section of, and it could be, this is just an example, it could be one section less of world history, because of the number of students in that grade, right? So it's a 0.2. Language is the same. The 0.8 in there, what we've been talking about with the languages, and I think Mr. Toomey can speak a little bit more articulately about it in a minute, though, is one of the things with the languages, and for that matter, even with visual performing arts, ideally, a high school student is a student-driven schedule. The courses are driven by the student interests. So we know that there is room for consolidation in some of these sections. We don't necessarily know where that's going to be, though, based on what do the students want to take. So with the languages, that's a good example. There might be more students who are signing up for this specific level of a specific language than another one, so that might be where that reduction comes in. So to the point, like, it might be spread across multiple languages. It could find itself in 2 different languages, depending on when they look at the enrollment and what students are signing up for. Same thing with the visual and performing arts, right? Like, if students are signing up for a specific thing, then that's going to dictate where those resources need to be allocated. But we do know that when we look at the numbers, we have a number of courses that are far, I will say, far from fully subscribed. And so, there was a comment made earlier that I think was an excellent comment, that, you could have an ensemble of 75 students. Our ensemble classes don't have 75 students in them, though. And that's kind of what we're looking at. We might have some ensembles that have 3 sections scheduled in, which is better for the students. We know that. None of this, I need to remember, I want to make it clear to everybody that we actually don't want to make any reductions, right? Even in our recommendation, we don't want to be making reductions. We're looking at where the enrollments are specifically, and do we have more classes where there might only be 5 or 6 students in a class, and we should be combining those classes so that there's more students involved in a specific class. Our goal is to not eliminate programs. Our goal is to figure out, are there ways that we can redistribute? But that's where we are with this, the first initial section. I don't know, Mr. Toomey, if you want to talk a little bit more about how you looked at the class averages.
Sure. Good evening. Thanks for having me. Having the first time go through of this, I think I took a different an approach where I looked at where the students were department-wide in general. And, the maths, the sciences, the Englishes, based on how many students are taking those classes currently and how many teachers, full-time employees there are in those departments. We kind of came up with an average of how many students per teacher in those departments. And it's clear that the math, the sciences, and the Englishes and some of those core courses have the highest averages of, per teacher rates. The lowest ones were the world languages and the visual performing arts. So based on how many faculty members are in each of those departments and how many students they have in all of those sections. So for example, in some of the visual and performing arts, there are, 3 ensembles for orchestra. And as Dr. Chu had pointed out, they are different levels, they're different types of orchestras and symphonies, but they are ones that could be combined. And in some of the world languages, there's low enrollments in some of those courses, where if we're looking at a hard look at where our enrollment has gone over the years and how it's affected our world languages, those world languages have taken a hit. It's a 2-year graduation requirement versus some of the core courses, which are 4 years and 3 years. So when you mix that all together, you're really just looking for where are the areas of our least enrolled classes, and it has nothing to do with the staff or anything. I think it's actually a little bit of what Mr. Engdahl has been talking about is it's just the numbers are lower district-wide in some of these visual and performing arts. So That's how I came to most of those decisions, like the ELA and the history. I just felt like there was room there to absorb those sections into, it would be a world history, it would be some of the freshman levels in ELA. So I just felt like there was room to absorb those in general based on the enrollments that we had in those levels and types of courses.
So that's, oh, you had a question?
Is that okay, or are we waiting to the end? Okay. So Dan, there's been some reference to kind of, for those sections, that there was a lot of thought into it and potentially combining a section, right?
Yeah.
I guess my question is were the enrollment numbers for these particular ones that we're looking at on slide 35, were they so low that, you know, when we absorb, are we gonna have like 30-person classes in some of these, or what is that going to look like?
In these ones, everything that we offer will exist in these ones. Yeah, some of those classes are designed to be larger classes. You know, some of the orchestras and ensembles, they are designed to be large classes, and they don't have those. The ELA, I think it's really 3 classes that out of the entire English department are eliminated. So it gives us wiggle room to find out where the interests are in certain electives and how many sections of, you know, English 11 or English 9 we might have. So those ones are.
To your point, it
yeah.
makes with it still falls within the school committee guidelines of trying to keep it at 25 to 1 at the 6 through 12 level. So in your English classes and your social studies classes and the world language classes, they wouldn't be going over 25.
Correct.
The visual and performing arts, some of them could, and they are designed to be, but not all of them either. It just sort of depends on, because again, there are other classes that exist in the visual and performing arts that aren't ensemble classes, but they have a number of ensemble classes that, and I will say, it is a good thing to have multiple options for the students, because what you're going to see as we talk about the further reductions is that it impacts those choices, and it impacts the ability to fit things into schedules. But we need to figure out where that sort of that balance is between, we don't want to do something in our needs budget that is going to negatively impact our programs, but we need to look responsibly at the resources that we have and say, can we really continue to have 3 different ensemble sections where there's less than where there aren't double digits in the ensembles? That's something that we should be looking at.
So how many ELA sections do we have?
Total?
Yeah.
Top of my head, I don't have that number, but
A lot?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we optimize and then reduce 3 sections. For the world language, so reducing 0.8, does that affect how many times the students meet?
No, it would not.
It would not?
No.
Okay.
No.
So the students will still actually, for example, if they are meeting 2 or 3 times a week, they will still actually have those opportunities.
Correct. It would be some of those levels or classes would not exist, but they would be placed in other classes. You know.
Okay.
Okay.
Kind of following on from what Ming Chen was saying, and especially kind of looking at the world languages and the ELA, some of those classes that maybe have lower enrollment, I also come at this from students who maybe are in special education or on 504 plans. Sometimes there are certain electives that really just fit them. Would they be, you know, based on this plan, potentially losing an elective that is more suitable for them in order to attain, or it be in a smaller class in order to kind of succeed? Because, you know, sometimes those students will potentially go into a bigger class. And
I would say that that impact would be small in this one. It would be significant in the other one, in the other scenarios of CATs.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the class sizes would be larger.
Yeah.
There would be no question about it. And some of the world languages are, for example, Mandarin and Latin. There's some some classes that are not
25 to 1.
Yeah.
And
What would Latin typically be? Do you mind me, Dan?
what's that?
Latin, what would that typically be?
The specific how many?
Roughly, yeah, you know. Just give
Well, I
me
think
a-
it's more of how many sections of Latin we have, okay, versus the interest that we have. So, I mean, that's really what it would be. It's certainly below 20 to 1. I can get you those specific numbers,
just
but
curious.
it's more about how many sections of Latin we have.
Okay.
And
Just
that-
like, I know for
yeah.
students who have dyslexia, that can be one of the languages that is actually more doable, more suited to their learning profile as well. So I would be mindful of any changes that reduces those opportunities for those students.
Any other questions? It sounds like we might go on to the next scenario, but please go ahead.
Yeah, just to tack on to what Catherine, I just want to reinforce that I think, we're looking at 4 departments that, I mean, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but have the reputation of being very supportive of a wide range of students, right? Like, they're very, my family's personal experience and anecdotally what I hear, very nurturing to a wide range of students, social emotionally especially. And so I just want to be mindful of that those are the 4 we're seeing here that probably stick out as the ones that do meet a lot of students' needs in other than academic ways. The question I had too was, when you look at this, what are some of the calculations and considerations for you in how these FTE numbers translate into individual staff members, and how you factor that in, especially as far as retaining and then down the line attracting staff? I know that's something on people's minds. I'm sure it's on your mind as well.
Yeah, that's a very, very difficult part of it. We have phenomenal staff, every single one of our members. I would say, a lot of this is based on what, and Dr. Chu had already mentioned, which is the student selection process. When they're selecting their courses, I think that's the real data that we use to determine what sections and what levels we offer. I've had many, many, many conversations with my faculty, giving them a potentially your job could be impacted. And it's very difficult. I don't want to lose any one of those people. But when it's one of these situations where we need to make some efficiencies in our staffing, those are the areas that it comes up, unfortunately. It has nothing to do with I agree, those are all phenomenal areas of our school and all those staff, but those are the areas where I feel like we can make those enrollment adjustments now. So.
Just as a follow-up, did you ever look at trading off that? Because I'm sure the impact will be that there are people at less than 1.0, individually.
Yes.
Were there times when you traded off that student selection criteria, saying this is where the center of mass of the students want to be, but if we drew lines in a different way, we'd have a more fully staffed, fully appointed staff members, even maybe at the cost of, a popular class or a popular section?
Yeah, we looked at it a million different ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Can I clarify then on that, because that was my question, was currently it's identified at 2.2 FTEs at WA. Is that 2 employees plus a 0.2 of somebody else's, or is that 2.2 across a number of teaching staff?
It's this added up.
Yeah, it's that
So
math.
it's this added
Yeah.
up. So it's not 2 people plus.
Well, I don't know if some people have multiple licenses or what that looks like.
Well,
So that's my.
That's a good
yeah.
thought. Hold on to that idea, because as we move into the slides later, we're going to be
Okay.
talking about potential people teaching outside of their subject areas and things like that. That's
Okay.
another. But that is. I think the idea is to, as difficult as this is, what we know is that our student population has decreased, and student interest in some subject areas has decreased. And so what Mr. Toomey's been able to do is say, based on those numbers, I do think it's feasible that we can absorb and reduce 2.2 sections. This is the recommendation. But even at the end of the day, honestly, we'll have this conversation. If we decide that we continue to support that 2.2 aspect, he could do the schedule and come back and say it's actually a different point two. It's a different, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, we're trying to lay out what it could look like.
Right.
Right? So that's something that, again, and it's gonna be the challenge that the academy, more so than any other school's gonna have, is dealing in real time in the spring with two potential different scenarios.
Yeah.
And what does that scheduling look like?
Because the thing is, if you're looking at point 8 in world languages, that's almost one person.
Yeah.
But it's very likely that those 4 sections are in like 4.
It could
be in different languages. So it's more. It might not be that you're eliminated one person. It's that you're eliminating point 2 in this language and point 2 in that language and point 4 in another language.
And for another point, like, in some cases, for example, I will just say, like, one of the reasons why I think Dan just initially started and looked at the .6 English position was one of the first ones that we had talked about, just because he knows that he has a .6 position. Like, so he has somebody who is not actually a 1.0 in the department. So he already knows that, and he had to make that adjustment for a specific reason. So he's looking to say, that's whole idea when we say that if someone retires or someone leaves, do we rethink how we can do things?
Right.
It was kind of like, well, okay, what would happen if those 3 classes weren't in the mix next year?
Right.
And then he looks at it, and so that's kind of the way that it starts to work. So there's also, it's not the only department that has some people like that. So there might be somebody who's .8 right now who might go to .6, and that might actually be okay with them, right? There could be somebody who ends up, somebody else stays 1.0, and then another person's reduced to 0.5 or something. You know what I mean? Like that. The matrix of it is very complicated.
I completely understand, and I'm not taking away from the mindful, strategic thoughtfulness that went behind it. I think it's trying to balance both staff and students, and also, you know, for me to vote on a budget, I think I kind of need to feel like I understand what the impact is in human terms. So that's kind of why I'd definitely be looking for a bit more not transparency, but you know, kind of.
I know we're gonna sort of talk on this but I just thought with that, with Catherine's comment, could you speak a little bit for those of us who don't have high schoolers, what the scheduling timeline is? Like you're talking about what courses are being subscribed. Can you just give us what that those months look like and when you might start to have this?
It's already started. We're well underway.
Okay.
We really pride ourselves on getting the students their schedules before they leave for school, before school's end, you know, in June. So right now we're in the process of finalizing and building the course selection process, or like the overall course guide, the program of studies. And then after that, in the late winter and spring, we do our course selection process. And recommendations from the teachers will be right after February vacation. And then as we go through the spring, we'll really start to hammer out what the sectioning plan is. Okay. And then there's a lot of behind the scenes work with the school counselors, working on schedules, making sure graduation requirements are met. That takes a lot of time. Yeah. It takes a lot of time, and
more so this year, I'm sure.
It's well underway now. You know, Mrs. Clark has continued to run that timeline very efficiently throughout the school year, and it's well underway right now. I mean, the curriculum coordinators were meeting today, talking about override process and all sorts of stuff.
Sure.
So.
Well, I guess just to clarify to your point, we wouldn't know before we vote.
Well, I suppose the next question is you would have historical data, I assume, on typically, you know, what has been. So I would, while you may not have a definitive answer, you might have a rough idea. And I think even if we could have that would be helpful.
This probably comes from the rough idea from historical data.
No, but what that looks like in human terms, like based on the historical course selection of students over the years. Even though the students haven't made their selection for this coming year, for you to have a definitive answer on what that looks like in terms of which staff members it specifically affects. I'm just wondering with kind of the last couple of years' data, would you be able to have a?
I was just gonna add, we
Yeah.
did briefly talk about this in finance subcommittee, and
Yeah.
one thing that was interesting was because of the transition from iPass to Power School, it's
lost
not
it.
as
It's not as easy.
straightforward,
But
yeah.
we
Yeah.
do know, I mean,
Oh, okay.
we know in some, that, again, that's sort of, some of our concerns is that when Mr. Toomey was looking at this, when you walk around the building, you know which classes are fully subscribed and which ones aren't as well
Yeah.
too. And you know
Yeah.
that there are some that have been, they haven't been as fully subscribed for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there are just different ways of looking at that. And so, so I think it is sort of leans that. And I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think giving you the 70 FTEs, giving you all of that, that's giving you as much data as we can at this moment in time before we actually know which individuals necessarily it's going to impact. But that's part of our whole process of communicating with people early to let them know how could be impacted. And you're right, whether it's, does the 70 FTEs actually equate to 70 people?
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty close, it does, you know, I mean, it's like, it's gonna
Well,
impact 70 people.
WA is different, I suppose, in the sense of the way the
Yeah.
classes work. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're talking about van drivers or elementary
Right.
teachers, it's different.
Right.
But I think that's why trying to understand the WA kind of
Well,
staffing.
Let's move through the slides,
Yeah.
right? So as we go in, unless there's more questions about this.
There is, and
Okay.
I feel like I want to stay more on this one because it is
Yeah.
something that we
Okay.
are, like, making or is coming to us in response to enrollment, right?
Yeah.
And like, we would potentially live with this override or no override, right? And so, because you said that about enrollment changing, I had a question that was like, well, I've seen the enrollment in the slides, you know, in this slide deck, I don't see a jump from last year to this year at WA. So I went back to 2019, and we had 1,700 students at WA
In 2019.
in 2019, and now we have 1,468. So we've had a difference of 232 students in about 4 or 5 years. I didn't have time to go back and look over that span, if we've made other adjustments, I think maybe here and there.
Some, we have reduced in English, we have absorbed some retirements.
That's
But it
mostly how it's
hasn't
been.
been-
It's been absorption through retirements or if somebody had left somewhere. So like a world history position recently. I'm drawing a blank on the other ones, but there has been,
We
but it
did-
hasn't been as this.
Last year we made an adjustment in, we reduced an art section, I believed. Again, that was somebody was leaving and we didn't replace
Okay.
an individual.
I think that's part of the story that's needs to be told too, because like you said, it is easier to see it at elementary and say, okay, this bubble of kids is moving, so we're, you know, staffing these classrooms, and then they're moving to middle school, like, and it's easier to see it, right? In the year-to-year sort of movement, but over the past 4 or 5 years, it's harder to see what those adjustments have been at WA.
And to that end, like, we have seen those adjustments in the elementary schools. We've seen those adjustments at the
Right.
middle schools.
Right.
Before the world shut down, I think it was before 2020, there used to be 5 language teachers at Stony Brook based on the enrollment, but those numbers went down and we knew that wasn't sustainable. So now both middle schools have 4 language teachers. So that was a change that then really hasn't been reflected at WA.
Right. Okay.
Right.
This is a very basic question, but it would be helpful, again, in terms of teacher licensing, is it typical for teachers to have licenses for one subject versus 2, or, because I'm just wondering, thinking from a teacher stability kind of standpoint.
It sort of depends on the content area.
Yeah.
Like, one of the things that, like, if you take the sciences, every single license is different.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have a biology license, you have a physics license, you have a chemistry license.
Yeah.
They are very, very, it's a completely separate license. Whereas your math licenses are grade span. You
Yeah.
have for, it could be, high school, middle school, high school, elementary. Your elementary licenses are elementary typically,
Yeah.
right? So there are some I think probably, at least in my experience, and if it's different, I would say that the people who I tend to know who have the most licenses tend to be language teachers, because most language teachers tend to know multiple languages, so sometimes they have a couple of different licenses. But again, each language is a different license.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I just,
Yeah.
for my own kind of information, and again, maybe trying to, longer term thinking of how we create stability, within staffing, that if we can encourage them to have as, multiple licenses, it obviously gives us the chance to, you still get to, keep your full-time staff, but maybe what they're teaching changes based on student enrollment per se, so, that's just.
And as far as DESI's concerned as well too, you can teach up to 2 sections outside of your licensure.
Oh.
And so you will have people who they might not have the license. Like I had a couple of different licenses. I
Yeah.
had a communications license, I had an English license, I had a theater license, right? You could, and I actually, I know it's not a good example that I say this at this moment in time, but I did teach math classes for a little while, right? I taught like a section of math in one high school
Yeah.
that I was in. I was a good math teacher, even though the slides don't show it. But sometimes that will happen. If there's a need, or you have somebody that could be their passion. Sometimes
Yeah.
people can pick up an elective.
Yeah.
They can teach something that,
Okay.
and so different things like that happen as well
So
too.
there is a bit, okay.
Okay. Any other thoughts, comments before we move on to the no override scenario?
And we might still keep talking.
Sure,
about it, right?
yeah,
'Cause
yeah.
what I was
Yeah,
just
yeah.
thinking is that there are some of the things that are more glaring in the slides that we have for the no override situation, which might answer some of those questions, because we didn't say that earlier, right? So
Okay.
like when he talks about electives being eliminated in departments,
Yeah.
The point was that the electives aren't being eliminated in the first scenario,
Okay.
you know?
Yep.
So the next handful of slides we took each one of those reductions and it sort of talked about what those impacts would look like. The first 2 slides are a little bit more generic. The first one's talking about just scheduling in general, because we would have to develop 2 different schedules, and we will have to, because we don't know what the answer is going to be. So that's going to just be a very difficult scenario. And, just knowing that the experience is gonna change. Well, actually, I'll let Mr. Toomey talk us through this.
Sure. So, in general, with, this amount of reductions to Westford Academy, the best way to describe it for the students, if I put myself in their shoes, is it'll feel different. It'll be, your experience will be significantly larger class sizes throughout the day. It'll just be big classes all day long. Could be big classes all day long. Where right now there is a balance of some smaller classes and larger classes depending on what your schedules are, but it would be a higher experience for many of the students having large classes in majority or all of their classes.
What kind of number when you
25 plus.
25 plus, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yep.
in the core classes.
Yep.
And that, in some of the rooms, that'll feel different, right? 'Cause
It'll-
you've all been in the
it'll
academy,
feel
too.
like a
So the
crowded
academy,
room.
there are some rooms that are small, and some are not as small.
Yeah, I mean, the old part of the building on the front side, the English and history wing, that very front one you're looking at, that's the old part of the building. Those are smaller classes. It's how many kids can you logistically fit in there, and then it'll change the way some of those classes are set up. Some of the U-shaped classrooms or groupings wouldn't necessarily work. It would have to be rows. Something that we've been working really hard on, using that as a strategy when we can for cooperative learning. We really pride ourselves on the success rate for scheduling, on the student requests. We're about 90% of when the students get what their first choices are or their backups, which is really good if you compare that to other area schools. So that'll be a big impact. You'll have it'll be a more limited access to choices because classes will be full.
whether it's because of space limitations or I will put a cap on a class at 30. It could take more, but it will be capped at 30. That's too big. Reductions in elective classes in every department. It's wide-ranging. We will be teaching the courses that are required. We will always have those graduation requirements. We will always have those, but within every department, certain electives could be impacted. The number of sections we have will be impacted. On some of these ones, we have about 165 students in one particular subject, math, that elect to double up in math a particular year, whether it's a geometry and algebra. And it's it's something that the students elect to do coming in after their freshman year. That about a majority of those would not be able to happen. Okay, we would have to completely rebuild how we have built the schedule. Student schedules would not be completed until we would need time over the summer. I mean, basically, we are already kind of starting to plan option B because it does take so much time. We're putting a lot of our time into plan A, but at this moment, but that could change as we move along. There would be a very limited movement for course changes, like the add drop period at the beginning of a school year. And what that is sometimes it's just students, their interests have changed, or they feel like their schedule's too much, or that level might be too much, or this level might not be the right level, and the teacher might say to that student, I think you belong in a higher level. That really that's hard to do at the beginning of the school year.
Yeah, there wouldn't be room for much
There wouldn't be room.
change. Right.
There wouldn't be room. The next slide. You can do that one.
Can I just,
Yeah, sure.
Principal Toomey, can I
Yeah.
just ask something? It occurs to me, we have all these students here.
Yeah.
I don't know how much they know about what we're talking about right now. Can I just,
Right.
would it be okay if we kind of straw poll them? And I would just hate for them to see all this not having enough of an understanding to fully get the context, appreciate the context of the differences we're talking about. Would that be okay if we?
Yeah.
But what's the straw poll question? Like,
Do they
I
know?
mean,
What do they understand what we're talking about as far as the override options?
That's a really broad question.
To
though.
back,
Well,
you mean,
well, that's a yes or no question. I mean, have they heard of the override? I want to get them up
well, I
to
thought
speed.
you were talking about the scheduling.
No, I want to get them up to speed enough that this conversation makes sense to them, so that when they go back and talk to their peers, they're not like, wait a second, they talked about 0.6 VPA, but then they talked about 0.8 VPA. You know, I want to make sure that it's clear that what the two scenarios are. Does that make sense, and would that be
I
appropriate?
think we can skip the straw poll and just kind of do
Yes,
an overview.
I think that's fine as
Okay.
well.
So there was a change in the heading, right? Did I
Yep.
miss that? Okay.
Yeah.
So for anyone, home, Zoom, whatever, the students in
YouTube.
the room following along, if you didn't watch our December 4th meeting, we do go into this in more detail, but there are two versions of the budget. There is limited, I'm probably going to oversimplify, so stop me, but there's limited revenue that the municipal governments can use to make their operating budgets. And we are facing increases in required expenses like health insurance, trash pickup, things that we have to pay. And so the only two ways to address that is either lowering your costs or bringing in more revenue. And the only way to bring in more revenue is to ask everyone in town who comes to town meeting or who votes in a town election to pay more in taxes. So there's a state law that caps how much you pay in your property taxes at 2.5%. There's a little bit of nuance there based on your home value and if you made it an improvement to your home and stuff like that, but I'll skip that. So our incoming revenue every year from property taxes only grows by 2.5%. That's our tax levy. And we can only.
State law.
State
Yes,
law, yeah.
Thank you. And we can only ask for more property tax money if the residents vote at 2 times at March town meeting, March 23rd, and May 7th election.
To allow the town to collect more tax.
Collect more
than the
money,
2.5
yes.
levy.
And I mean.
So everything we've been talking about up until now has been
If we
best
cut.
case scenario, so the cuts we talked, best case scenario
Right.
that the town says, yes, we'll raise the tax levy more, you can have that extra however much,
Right.
it's quite a bit of money more.
Yes,
Um,
so
and
the
now we're
2.2 at WA.
the 2.2 of staff equivalent would be that. Now we've transitioned into what if that doesn't happen,
So
which is
we
a
have-
much more
Yeah.
dire situation.
Right, so I've recommended a needs-based budget, and then if we were to live within the constraints of Proposition 2.5. The difference between those two budgets is $3.2 million. So that's the difference.
So if we don't get that $3.2 million from taxpayers, this is the impact that could happen. And we won't know that, as Dan's saying, until May 7th.
Right.
So that's why he's alluding to 2 course selection processes to figure that out. And then maybe not, you're saying likely not finding out your schedule until
Right before school starts.
right before school starts. Yeah, okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
No,
Thank
great
you.
point.
Hopefully it helps.
Great point, because that's not just a decision of the 7 of us. That
That's the
is
thing, yeah.
up to town meeting and town elections.
Yes, and I'm super impressed with this group, and I know a lot of you, and so I'm proud of you for coming out and speaking. And a lot of you are potential voters, and so this stuff matters, and this is going to get voted on at town meeting and in the May election. So those of you who will be 18, you might want to pay extra attention and decide to show up and and bring like 5 of your friends to show up too, if you so desire.
Sorry, thank you.
So we're at the next.
Anyway.
Let's move on to the next slide.
So,
Okay.
You want me to keep going, Dr.?
Yes, please.
Yes, please, thank you.
So, as the 400 seniors go out the door every year, many of them need college senior letters of recommendation. That when teachers' course loads are going up significantly, there's only so much extra time you have, so that will be impacted. Staff members may teach section outside their license or area of expertise. That could happen. Impact the ability to build as many trusting adult relationships just with larger class sizes. I mean, that's a proven stat that the larger the class sizes, the harder that is in many scenarios. Another one that's really kind of come along here is when we lose that many FTE positions, whether they go out of district, they go somewhere else, whether they're bumped or not to a different building, whatever. I mean, there's a real impact on co-curriculars. So those are my estimates on how many of those current Westford Academy teachers that are doing co-curricular activities either won't be able to because they're no longer at the building and their schedule doesn't allow it. Maybe they're working somewhere else, or with significant higher class sizes, they might not be able to based on the time commitments. This is one of the first positions. So the first 2 slides were a general overview, and then we get into some of the more specifics about the positions. This was the school counselor reduction of 1.0. The impacts for this one would be certainly changes in the post-secondary planning process, so that's college or whatever it might be after Westford Academy. There'd be with a higher caseload for many of for all the counselors. There would be certainly a more limited personalization of the interactions that they have with families and parents and the students on that process. Additionally, all the counselors will be picking up 12 more seniors to write college recommendations for. That's a big chunk of their time. I mean, it takes time to look at a whole profile, think about it, and write it. If you talk to any college counselor, one of the pieces of evidence that they look at consistently and through and through for years is the recommendation from their school counselor. So that's a big impact. There'd be elimination of some of the small group curriculum. So over the years, we've been pushing into the school counseling department's been pushing into English classes and PE classes to talk a little bit more about whether it's mental health or the college planning process or the post-secondary planning. There'd be elimination of some of those things. The caseloads right there would be 30-plus students would be 230 students per counselor. That would be up from 200. Potential elimination of counseling programming. And these are all things. We have a phenomenal school counseling department that I think a lot of high schools in the area don't do a lot of these things, but these are very important over the years of what we have come up as like a good mix that meets the needs of all of our students. That'll be the junior job shadow day, the career breakfast day, some of all the counseling newsletter that's been consistently coming out. The Coffee with the Counselors, which is an outreach program this year they've been doing. It's been very well attended, and we've always been able to have, counselors have done a phenomenal job of working their schedules months in advance to figure out who can always be available, and that will be impacted. There'll be times that counselors will not be available for our students, just based on meetings and things along those lines. And then the last one is some of the mental health screenings. We currently screen 9 through 12. That would be impacted. We would certainly do the freshmen as what I think is what we need to do. But after that, it would be impacted on the other grades when we're doing our mental health screenings.
How many school counsellors do we currently have done?
I think it's 7, top of my head, Mrs. Clark. What do we got? 7. 7 includes Mrs. Clark, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you do have the addition of the 3 school adjustment counselors.
Correct.
In addition to that, to the counseling. Okay.
Okay, so if we go to the math and computer science reductions, primarily on the math side of things, the class sizes would jump to over 25 on some of those CP level classes, the Algebra 1, the Geometries, Algebra 2. Some of those honors levels classes are already at that size, anywhere between 25 and 30. We would reduce the number of sections. This is that doubling up that I talked about earlier, which is a popular one in the math. A lot of students do that with the intent often of getting to certainly the level of calculus, and that's where they're trying to get to by doubling up.
Mm-hmm.
That would be impacted. We have to figure out a process, probably a lottery or something, to figure out how we would go about offering those open spots. There would certainly be less math and computer science electives. It could be there's a pre-calc AP that we might not run. Other electives on the comp sci, which how many sections we do, which will make it harder to get that path of comp sci. That some of those students are looking to get to that AP level. It would just be much more of a scheduling challenge, and that'd be a tough one. On the science side of things, yeah, next slide there. Yep, thank you. This would be, there were 3 areas really in science. There's physics, chemistry, and biology. Chemistry has some really strict, how many kids you have in a lab doing type of things at once. And also in physics and biology, that's where many of our electives are. So on the biology side, we have marine biology, environmental. We have all these different types of electives. On the physics side, there's robotics, engineering, a lot of those. So, and a lot of those courses are helping meet graduation requirements, where you have, you need 3 years of science, right? And you get some of those. The physics isn't really the fit for some students, and they are able to access that that graduation requirement through some of these electives. So that becomes a challenge. Some of the labs, in physics and some of these other in classes, and again, they're all going to kind of naturally get a little bit bigger when you're having reductions in the departments. It might be difficult to do some of the particular labs that we do with some of the smaller class sizes under 24, just based on lab safety protocols, having on what you can do and how many materials, and there's a big impact of if you're in a group of 3 or 4 versus if you're in a group of 5 or 6, like how much actual hands-on learning you're doing. There would be electives, there would be a reduction of science electives in the forensics, marine biology, environmental, robotics, engineering, and we'd really just try to have the core graduation requirements for the students to meet the graduation requirements that they need. There'd be very few science electives. And there are some students that double up in science currently right now because of interest. They want to do those things, and essentially that would be eliminated. The English 2.0 reduction on top of the 0.6, this would eliminate the science electives. I'm sorry, the English electives. This would eliminate the film and lit, the journalism, the creative writing electives that we have in science. So you'd have English 9, 10, 11, 12, honors, CP. You'd have those types of classes. It would certainly impact the ghostwriter, as that journalism is a class, and that is where the ghostwriter is fundamentally derives from. There's multiple levels within those journalism classes. Some of the higher level journalism students are the editors, all the way down to the rookie reporters in Journalism 1. An increase in class size will certainly, this is the old part of the building, where it's really, if we need to fit 26, 27 desks in those rooms, it will change the layout of how the English department is able to operate. Right now, a lot of them are set up just like this, with a U shape, or they're in groups. I hear desks moving above my office all day long. And some people allegedly complained about that, and I said that's the sound of learning that goes on up there, which is a great sound. And that might not happen. I might not get that sound because of having that many desks in a classroom. We move on to the world language areas. Again, this is in addition to the .8. This would really cut into the world language department. Spanish, the Latin, and the Mandarin would be impacted, and a possible complete elimination of the Mandarin program. That is not a program that we offer at the middle schools currently, so that is the lowest prescribed students in that world language. We would, for the students that are currently in that program, we would look to some sort of online programming for EduSeer to make sure that they get at least a graduation requirements in. So that would be if they're in one, and then finish out in their two, and then we'd have to figure out what we would do for some of the higher level students in Mandarin. This would directly impact the class sizes in levels 1 and 2. Those class sizes, again, those are a lot of where our students are meeting their graduation requirements. And those can be challenging classes. Those classes include students that are there because it's a graduation requirement. They could be students, a lot of students who are on IEPs, 504s, or they just learn differently, and language is not for them. But they're doing it because it's a graduation requirement. It would significantly push those class sizes up. Okay. And it would eliminate some of the upper level honors and CP classes that we might have. We do a lot of combining of levels on some of our high level classes already, and we might not be able to do that because of just how many students are going to be in the class. Okay, and that's that last bullet. In addition to the .6, a .8 cut in visual performing arts. Across the department, it would continue to be reductions of some of the ensembles, and then there would be a big hit on the arts side, such as photography or ceramics, could be eliminated. That would be based upon, staffing and course selections. There would be something there that would have to be eliminated. And it does have a district-wide impact. Our music, and I went to the winter concert the other night. It was phenomenal. The wide range of talent and the ability was unbelievable. And people notice Westford Academy music and performing arts, and it's well known. And I agree with everything these students said. There's no question about that. And that would be an impact. There would certainly be an impact there with having any type of part-time staff. The social studies, the 1.4, it would really squeeze out the number of sections we have in certain things, especially on the AP side of things. That's one that's kind of felt in the AP area in social studies. AP US is, I believe, is our largest AP. We have the most amount of sections. It might be psych, but I think it's AP this year. But psych falls in that same department, so we have a lot of AP offerings and high honors and honors classes in the social studies. That's where this one would be felt. How many sections we offer and what of those, or how many sections we offer of each of those would be really impacted. And it would certainly, it would require staff to really pick up some PD in a very short amount of time to teach some of these AP courses. You don't just show up and teach AP US. That's just not something that it takes some training, it takes a commitment from the staff and the department to do that, and it takes some time. Another big impact is the larger class sizes, and they'd all be 25 plus to 1 per class on average, and that impacts the amount of research in the writing, and that's something that certainly would happen in English as well. I forgot to mention that. How much writing a teacher is actually able to correct and provide valuable feedback in the right amount of time, that would be impacted. So we'd have to adjust how we're teaching and how we're doing things. And certainly we consistently hear from our college students that they get to college and they're strong writers and they know how to research and they know how to cite things. So that would be impacted with the class sizes. The library media specialist goes hand in hand with English and world history. There is so much collaboration between those departments already. It would really reduce or eliminate, with the two of them there's always one that can support classroom teachers in the library doing the research and providing sourcing and work collaborating with those teachers on projects or papers that they're working on with their students. Dr. Chu's mentioned in the opening comments about the mini health fair that he went to. That started with collaboration in the library with the librarians. And more right now. I received Attorney General Ryan, there's a big push right now to understand what is real and what is fake on social media, okay? And what are accurate and what are non-biased resources. And the librarian is always doing that. That's a big part of that job. So certainly library operations will be impacted. It's a very efficiently well-run library right now. It is a hub for the students, for sure. And unfortunately, it would be closed sometimes during the day because of only having one librarian for coverage. Okay.
What's the current staff in the library?
There's two.
So this in half?
Correct.
Got it, okay. Thank you.
So the last slide is just, again, our timeline. No, on mine, I didn't give you
Oh, no.
I changed that, I'm sorry. So if we go back to slide
Timeline.
3, I think it was 3, right?
Well,
Yeah.
while you do that, I really appreciate this breakdown because it is heavy and difficult and
Thank you.
a sensitive topic, but I think it's clear how much thought you put into these, like spelling out the impact, and I hope that makes it feel real, right, to anyone watching.
It was a lot of work with the curriculum coordinators, my deans, Mrs. Clark. Really continual conversations, trying to figure out what we would do in these scenarios.
And I would say, they're agonizing over this.
I
You know
know.
what I mean? Like,
I'm sure.
They're really, it's very difficult conversations. That's one of the things that because there are so many more questions about what things look like with the student distribution at the academy, that's why we knew that there were more questions about the sections at the academy. So it's not to say that we're now advocating for one group versus another group either, because we already talked about all those other FTEs. And one of the things about this presentation now, which is why I want to go back to the timeline, is to remind you, but more importantly, you're all aware of it, to let the students know, to let people who are listening know that we now need to take factual information and be able to answer questions, because one of the things that I have to keep repeating is that as we move forward in the override process, we cannot use our public funds to advocate for a specific result. So all I can do is have all of the facts at my disposal so that when people ask me the facts, I can say, this is what will happen if we have to make these reductions. This is what will happen if we don't. And so a part of this will be a part of this roadshow when we're talking to people. And so that's another reason why some people might be thinking, well, gosh, this is cold, the way they're talking about this. But the other piece is that we have to just be factual about it, right? We can't even be sensationalizing it in any way. It needs to just be, no, this is the reality, this is what it would look like. And so in many ways, outside of making ourselves available, and I will make myself as available as possible, and I will talk to as many people as possible, I need to help people understand that we are limited as to how we can advocate. We can talk about, this is what the scenario looks like if we have $3.2 million more dollars. This is what the scenario looks like if we have to reduce our budget by $3.2 million.
Yeah, Sean?
I think, Dan, I can't thank you enough for being here. I think, for me, seeing the numbers, and probably it's just how I think, like, seeing 8 FTEs or something, that's not persuasive. Seeing what Principal Toomey has put in front of us today, like, it helps contextualize everything. And and I actually just thought of this now, not coming into the meeting. This might even be helpful to do at a building level for the other reductions that are being proposed, presuming that an override doesn't go through, to help really understand. And I know the high school is just different, right? Like, because there's so much variety from class to class. But
yeah, we this level of detail for like the interventionists, the middle school general ed reading, you know, like for each one of them. This was just what I've initially gotten questions about, and I know what we came up with in the finance subcommittee as a first pass. I have thoughts on comments I'd like to make on sort of what's next, but if anyone has any initial reactions to what we just went through, or further questions for Principal Toomey, I'll pause for that.
I kind of agree with what Sean said in terms of looking at this on the middle school and elementary schools. And again, I just reiterate, I suppose, the level of detail we got to a bit more in that staying within the 2.5%, I suppose the B budget or whatever we're calling it. Just I kind of, if we could have something similar like that done for the A budget, it might be helpful, because, you know, this is a very different type of budget year and discussion I feel we're having, and I also think, you know, no matter what we do, if we don't pass if the override doesn't pass, it's across the board, but maybe there's some discussion about, well, actually, in our A budget, is there any wiggle room that we could change or chop or whatever before kind of finalising and voting on it or whatever. So I think that's just, but I feel it's very much in the hands of the voters this year and the people of Westford. It's kind of a strange discussion I think we're having this year.
Yeah. Well, I was going to circle to, so right now it's December 18th.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what I'd love feedback from the committee on is how we should handle our January 2nd meeting. So that's being publicized as our like legally mandated public hearing, which typically we haven't had a lot of engagement during, right? But that's the part where I would be open to, maybe it's a different format of a meeting. You know, we do have a pretty strict public comment for our business meetings that helps us get to the things that we need to get to every 2 weeks to sort of have the 7 of us in session. But does anyone have any thoughts about how we could approach?
Well, even if we, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think I alluded to in the finance subcommittee a little bit, which I say there is scenario 1 versus scenario 2, but like some of the reorg in the scenario 1, could also happen in scenario 2, so that it's
Did you
going
mean
to-
reversed?
whatever.
Yeah.
So it's going to actually lower the ask, because I talk to people on the streets. People are shocked about the amount of money being asked, because between the town and the school, it's an $8 million ask. So to put things in perspective, I look at, like, because I mentioned to you guys, is that the city of Newton proposed an override similar to what we are being asked, but their budget is like almost 4 times bigger. So the magnitude of the amount of money being asked is way over people's acceptance or comfortable level. So is there any way to actually look into that, to reduce the amount being asked, to look if there is any way we can reorganize? Because I agree with some of the members talk about, like, and I have been advocating for that over the last few years, is like reduce the impact of the classroom teacher, but look into other areas. It's like, do we really need this kind of organization structure? Can we actually look into it differently? So those are the things we should take a look, because the $8 million ask is like equivalent to actually 10% actual taxes, which that's a huge amount. And then especially people mention that the inflation, like $200, $300 actual for grocery, and then $100 actual for gas. And that's like $300-400 actual cost people couldn't afford. So with the economy not really doing well, because I don't know about you guys, I mean, in the tech sector, we have been seeing massive layoffs for the last 2 years. No matter you're a big company like Google, Facebook, or Amazon, like a lot of startups, because the money is so expensive, they simply failed, right? Either being acquired or actually closed the door. So like Westford residents disproportionately like work in the tech industry, so they're feeling the impact. So the timing that definitely is not helping. And then if there is any chance, and then we're serious to say we want to actually have a manageable or workable budget for it to have any chance to pass, we probably need to think about like how to reduce our ask between the town and the school. $8 million, that's a lot of money, right? The last time it's being asked is much, much, much lower in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying, Ming Chen, that in one sense we should be looking to do further cuts anyway in our A budget? Or
But like, I want to look into reorg, right? So
When you say that though, like, I'm confused. I'm confused about a couple things you said, but when you're talking about reorg, right? Like, this is a different kind of company. So, because you have people with different licensures, so you just can't like
reorg does not need to talk about, for example, WA classroom teachers. That's what I'm alluding to. Okay, so there are other areas which like we lay out some of the area we could rework, and then why don't we look into that, right? My whole point is like, how do we limit the impact to WA classroom teachers, but like also reduce the ask?
But the largest part of the budget is salaries and benefits. So when you're talking about making cuts and doing reorg, like, are you? I guess I'm saying, like, say more about that, because I think that the reason why there's a number of reasons why the ask is so high is because benefits have also got increased this year. So like when you're looking at salaries, it's not just salaries, it's also like benefits and insurance that we give folks, and those costs have also gone up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really important to remember that those costs have also increased. And so the ask is high because the need is high.
Yeah, but the WA teachers is only 11 out of the 70.
So are you saying that we should favor the WA teachers over the other schools? Because that doesn't seem right.
We will find a way to actually, for example, instead of like reducing so many, look into reducing less, right? But like also look into some of the other proposals which we may need to think about, like for example, our district, they don't have this kind of structure, and then we have it. So do we really need it? So some of the efficiency.
We're talking about outsourcing our special education transportation and hoping and hoping that those people get their jobs picked up by NRT and Vanpool and some of those vendors. I mean, any scenario right now is a difficult ask.
Sorry, I know you've been waiting. I just wanted to put a thought on to Ming Chen's point, which is a counterpoint, I guess, which is, I hear you. I think you have a fair point. I've heard from residents too that 8 million is a lot, and the select board presentation had a projected tax impact, and it's about $112 per $1 million of override for a median house. So it's a lot of money. But I would also say that the budget task force benchmarked the schools, and we have one of the lowest per pupil spending, and we are below our peers in almost every function code. So I think you have a fair point. I don't know where where more would come from.
I think my point is that if we're serious about getting something done, the amount being proposed, $8 million, probably will fail us. That's my take. And then, do we really want guaranteed failure, or we have some chance of success? I think that's a choice.
I hear you, and I'm going to put a pin in that conversation for now, because I think that is the conversation for January 9th. We have that joint meeting with the FinCom and Select Board, and so that's where that will play out a little bit more. You had a thought?
You said mostly what I said, which is I'm always in favor of looking at ways to reorganize for efficiency. I also think we've done a lot of that in the past few years. We've done a lot of that at central office over the years. I mean, we have, the budget task force tells us we are lean.
Yep.
And so I don't think there's a major get to that. There could be more, and I would encourage us to always look for more efficiency that we can find, but I think that's tough. But I also hear you on the third budget C, which is, I understand, because I've heard it too. Like, is there a different override amount? But I don't know. I think that's a future conversation. Back to your original question about January 2nd.
Thank you.
I mean, I guess off the top of my head, my sense is that I appreciate hearing from people. So I think having public comment is good. I appreciate people who came out. So if there's still an appetite in the public to come and weigh in on things, that's great too. But I also feel like what we did tonight was really good. I really appreciate the way you stepped through the decision making and the impacts. I want more. I think the public needs more of that. I mean, I think that's our service right now, is informing. We've informed 20 people tonight and whoever's online, but continuing to inform. Maybe it's overkill. Maybe we just point people back to this meeting, but
could we consider just changing the format of our January 2nd meeting to think of it more as a Q&A forum, a chance for people to, engage in a conversation, dialogue, and ask the questions and try and understand? Because this is a big, there's a lot of learning in it. And
it's a different year.
It's a different year, and bearing in mind, the budget task force started on this last spring. You guys worked really hard on it over the summer. The majority of people in Westford have not followed along, and it's 100 pages.
You're telling me no one has read the report?
I was listening over the summer.
I have a printout. Who wants to take it home?
But it's a 100-page document, and I'm especially aware of our families in town who have 2 working parents and 2 or 3 kiddos who are on a tight schedule, Monday through Sunday at this point, I think, with all the activities, and asking them to kind of come in and spend time on a 100-page report, that's a big ask, and maybe a lot of time to try and understand something. Whereas if we change kind of the nature of our meeting for January 2nd and more come in, ask us the questions, you know, and do more of a Q&A.
So I have some questions about that. I think that there's a few limitations on people's participation. I think one thing you can ask people to do is submit questions in advance. So even if they can't participate at that time, you can ask for submissions of a question in advance, and then we can answer the questions that way. If some of the questions are similar or whatever, we might consolidate some questions, and so we can ask for that ahead of time, and they'll be answered in the meeting. There's one simple thing that we can do, which is put public comment at the end. We have it at the beginning, but then we tell people, like, we're going to talk about stuff, but you're not going to be able to, so we might just move public comment to the end, and so if people have questions on any part of the presentation, and there just might be thinking about who participates in the meeting, who folks might want to hear from. Like, you know, Principal Toomey was here today, there might be other folks that we might want to have in the room, so if there's some level of detail, in terms of participants, function, and just like question submissions.
One additional thing that came to mind was change of venue, for a couple of reasons. One is picking another, like, just, I think it piques people's interest. Like, oh, why is this in a different location? This must be special, especially if you're in a larger venue. Like, oh, they must expect people to show up. Yeah.
I mean,
only if people show up. If
I'm just saying it might encourage people to show up.
Absolutely.
And to both of those points, I mean, we would love engagement and questions because it helps us think of things that we don't. We're only 7 people, and our inboxes have been relatively quiet. So I would encourage people to reach out to us so that we know where to dive into and provide more detail and like you said, to be that educating voice. I've been
there's a select board meeting on the 2nd as well.
Probably.
It just impacts WestfordCAT's ability to support both meetings.
Okay. We'll check that. And I, just because we've been facing this way, did I miss anything? Do you guys?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it wouldn't be their normal meeting, right?
So we can.
It's Tuesday.
Yeah.
But it's not the second Tuesday.
But they.
Officially, they're second and fourth Tuesdays, but do they stick to that?
Select board has a meeting on 26th. So if they have on 26th, they wouldn't have it.
I don't
on
think they have
the
on the second.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't I check room scheduling and WestfordCAT scheduling and look at maybe a venue change. Our email is school-committee at hyphen. Thank you. Are they different?
Yeah.
No, dash, school dash.
It's a hyphen, but it's
Okay.
a hyphen, sorry.
It's a horizontal line halfway through the letter.
It's the middle line, not
Yeah,
not
the little
not
line.
the lower line.
School-committee at westfordma.gov, or we all have individual ones, just like staff, first initial, last name, at westfordk12.us. We are planning another finance subcommittee meeting that week of January 2nd. We will have a meeting that week. We will also have a joint meeting with the Select Board and the Finance Committee on January 9th. And then we will be intending to vote on our budget January 16th. So we're backtracking from that date. So I encourage the 7 of you to reach out to me to let me know where you think we need more information to get to a place where we're.
And Valerie, for those of who are watching, who may not know the insider baseball, right? Steps of this budget process. It would be a vote. There would be 2 separate votes that you've referenced. Do you want to?
I still need to
March and-
research that.
Right.
Oh, you mean ours?
Correct. Yeah.
No, you mean the towns?
So, if anyone's interested in, and we've spent a lot of time talking about Proposition 2.5 override and the like. For those who are interested in it,
Yes.
there's 2 potential votes that are coming
Correct.
up. Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that would be Saturday, March 23rd at WA for town meeting, and town election is scheduled for Tuesday, May 7th.
And they
Did
have
I say
to pass-
2023? 2024.
2024.
24.
And they have to pass both.
March 23rd, 2024.
And they have to pass at both.
A majority.
A majority at both.
Correct. Have I missed anything? January 2nd meeting. Thank you, Dan. Principal
We
Toomey.
thank Mr. Toomey a lot. I also want to say that, like, our principals and curriculum
know.
coordinators
Thank you.
have
We
been
did
at
see
this
it.
meeting and the last meeting, I've not wanted to put them on the spot with questions they may not be able to answer right away, but.
But we can
we are
chat about that
prepared
ahead of
to-
time for the
to talk
second,
more about
yeah.
it,
Okay. Okay, thank you. I know it's
Thank you.
difficult. Any final thoughts or?
I just wanted to, just one thing, Ming Chen, you were saying on the 8 million, just to kind of note, that figure isn't set in stone yet. It's still
That's
kind
correct.
of up for debate and in the middle of a process, and it really is not just school committee, but a select board as well, so.
Yeah, that's a proposal, right?
At the
their
moment,
proposal.
yeah, it's the starting point. I think I keep thinking of it as this is the jumping off point. Now we figure out where we go from there.
Because like Newton voted down the similar amount, and then their budget is 4 times larger.
One of the pieces that I didn't mention in our last presentation, and I know Town Manager Kristen Lass did talk about, so I want to make sure that we do mention it as well too, is our focus has been on the development of the FY25 budget, because that's our responsibility, right, to look at the FY25 budget. But one of the reasons why we're talking about an override as well too is because we have concerns about FY26 and FY27 as well. And so we have our projections. We've helped the town with looking at what our projections are for FY26 and FY27 in both scenarios as well. But our responsibility is for me to recommend the FY25 budget. Her responsibility is a little bit different in terms of talking about a balanced budget first with the town. So I just kind of wanted to remind people that, remind all of you and remind people who are paying attention that the other reason why we don't know exactly what that number is because we know what our needs request is, and we know what the 2% target that we were asked to identify, what that would look like. But we don't necessarily know, as we determine what a potential override would be, it needs to be something that can help us for multiple years.
Right. Right, and actually, that's a great point, because if you haven't had a chance to look at last week's select board meeting, they talk through that there will be a point where we have to decide, is it a 2-year override amount or a 3-year override amount? And sort of the strategy that goes into that. And also, other communities have approached it with an override stabilization fund. So there's all sort of approaches that will go into this. Okay, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye. Thank you.